Hi, my name is Vita Anderson and welcome to my sewing and quilting studio. Today we're going to be doing a beginner project. We're making a sewing mat that we will use to organize all of our sewing notions and tools. So let's get started. So this is the mat that I made for underneath this particular sewing machine, and each of my mats is a different width and a different depth based on the sewing machine. So it's going to be really important for you to take a measuring tape, either a sewing measuring tape or a carpenter's measuring tape, and figure out what size mat you need. So to figure that out, we want to go beyond the back of our sewing machine to the front of the table that we have the machine on, and then whatever our drop is. Mine is 21.5 inches. Then to make our pockets across the front, that is just one piece. Okay. So now that you've got your measurements, you're ready to cut your two pieces for your mat. Your main piece of the mat that's going to go underneath, and then this narrow piece that's going to be our pockets. Now the width is up to you. Think about what notions and tools you want to put in those pockets, and that will determine the width. Mine is 4 inches. So it's 4 inches this way. That'll be deep enough that things I can see what's in there, and then some of them will be actually tucked in and they won't hang out at all. And I'm going to show you how we can make our own bias tape. So I've already made enough for the project, but I want to show you how to do it. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to take about a half a yard or a yard of fabric. Make sure that it's pressed. Make sure that one side is nice and even across here. Not every time that you do this is it going to be even all the way through. So you want to make sure that at least one side is even. So first of all, the more that you use your mat, the more you're going to have these little divots in your mat. And my mat, this is my very first one that I've had for about 5 years, it has a lot of divots. So I don't usually cut on this mat straight on, and I don't usually cut the full width here. So what I like to do is once I have a clean edge, I'll fold it in half and make sure that those are lined up nice and neat. If you don't have one of these rulers, you're going to want one. This marks off up to 5.5 inches, and it makes it really easy for cutting strips. So when I make a bias tape, I like it to be about 2.5 inches, and especially on this project because I want some of the print on this fabric to show. So I set it down. You can line it up at the bottom, but I find that if you line it up here on that 1 inch line, that you'll get a better cut. And I cut sideways. That way my mat lasts longer. So you're going to cut several strips. If you take your mat that you're making and you measure all 4 sides, you can figure out how many inches of bias you're going to need. You'll want to make sure that your selvage edge, which usually has some sort of print on it, some writing, take those and trim those off because you don't want those as part of your bias. So trim those off, and then we're going to take them over to the sewing machine, and I'm going to show you how to turn this into a bias tape. Okay, so this is how we make our bias tape. I've got 2 strips here that are 2.5 inches wide by however long the fabric was, and we're going to lay one face up, right side up, and we're going to take the other one and we're going to do it face down or right side down, and we're going to square it up with the end of the first one. Now if you don't have a 1/4 inch foot, this is a 1/4 inch foot, it has this little ski on the side is what I call it, that helps you keep your seam at a 1/4 inch for quilting. If you don't have one of those, that's okay. You can also use this 1/4 inch tape that you see on my sewing machine and on my extension table here. That is also very helpful, but it will come in handy for our next step. So what you do is place this along here. You're going to line up your needle with that corner, And then you're gonna take your other corner here, and you can see how it's on the red line here, and that helps me to keep this in a perfect diagonal line. So do a little short back stitch to lock that in. Sew to the end. And now I'm going to show you how we trim this piece off. Now we need to trim this little bit off of our bias tape. So I like to use my quilting ruler, and each of these increments is 1/4 inch. So I line one of those up with the stitches that I just put in there. And then trim it off, and I have a nice seam here. Then you're going to want to take it, and you're going to want to either finger press it or take it to your ironing board and press it. I always iron mine because you're going to need it to iron to the next step as well. So I'll show you how we do the next step. All right, so now we're at the ironing table. Yours is going to be much longer than this. You're going to need more than 2 strips, I'm sure, but this, for the purpose of showing you, this will be good enough. Press that down. Then we're going to flip it to the wrong side, and I'm going to use my scissors over here to cut at an angle on this end. These are crappy scissors, but they'll do the trick. We're going to fold the end over about 1/4 inch or a little bit more. Press it down. Then the length of this bias tape, we're going to fold in half and press it as we go along. Now there are lots of tools out there for making bias tape, and when I first started sewing, I used several of those tools. But once I kind of got the hang of what was going on, I decided that this was the best way, the easiest way. It doesn't require anything extra but that ruler. So now we've got our bias binding, and we're going to take that and we're going to sew it to the top of our pocket front. So if your fabric has a definite front and back, make sure that you're looking at the back of your fabric and not your front. And then this doesn't really apply to what we're doing with this one, so I'm going to go to this other end where it's just squared off, and I'm going to lay it a little bit beyond the start of the pocket piece, making sure that my raw edge is lined up here and my folded edge is on the left side. I'm using a 1/4 inch foot. If you don't have a 1/4 inch foot, you can use the tape. If you've got the tape, you can use that. Back stitch to tack it in place. And then just sew the length of the pocket piece. When you get to the end, just tack it in place, and you're done. Now we're going to go over to the ironing board and we're going to press that out. So here we are. We're just going to trim this end off and trim this one off where we started. And then we're going to fold our bias up. Make sure it's nice and smooth. Steam is always going to be your best friend when you're sewing. Okay, if it helps you, go on ahead and fold it over and press it down. This is going to be the front of our pocket. And then we're going to take it and we're going to sew it right along this edge. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to get it as close to this edge as I can without going off. So whatever you're comfortable with. If it needs to be more, that's totally fine. Don't stress out about it. Backstitch a little bit. Sew all the way down the length of our pocket. If you need to stop and readjust. Backstitch at the end. All right, so there is our pocket piece with the binding sewn on, and we've got some nice prints and colors showing up there. So now I'm going to show you how to sew the lines that are going to divide up your pocket. So you might want to think about what you're going to put in there, and then that will help you decide how wide to make all these little pockets. All right, so now we have our mat and we have our pocket piece that we just put the bias binding on. And you can take it and then just pin it on this end and then on this end. And then to mark out your pockets, just decide what it is that you're going to put in there and lay them out, and then use your ruler to mark off what the distance needs to be. I totally winged it when I did mine, but I knew what I was going to put in there ahead of time. It took me a while to buy one of these rulers. I couldn't recommend it enough. These lines help you line everything up so that these lines are straight. So when I draw these lines on here, I can line up this dark line here. It doesn't matter the distance or the length, but I can line it up here on the 2, and then I know when I go to draw this line that it's going to be straight. Or I can also use it to measure. So I can figure out, okay, well, I want it to be 3 inches wide. So I can mark off the 3 and then line it up and draw the rest of it. Now when I made mine, because I have a white background fabric here and a tan fabric here, what I did was I first used the tan thread and stitched it down, and then I went back and I added the white. You do not have to do that. I chose to do that. It's certainly good enough to just do white all the way down or tan all the way down, whatever color is your main color, or even an accent color. Feel free to get creative with it, but that's what I did. So we're going to use our regular foot. Most machines are going to have what they call a tack stitch. I know I used the term tack when I was backstitching here, but a tack stitch is really, it's like a double, triple stitch. So my machine has that stitch. It's number 2. So I'm going to change to number 2, which is this tack stitch. And you're going to see that the machine is going to, it's doing like, it's a heavier duty stitch. They use it on jeans, like on the pockets where things have something going in and out a lot. And that is what will keep this from coming undone over time. So I just start a little bit ahead above this trim here. And again, I'm using the tack stitch. And you'll see that it's going to go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. So it takes a little bit longer. You're just going to follow the line that you drew on the pocket. If your machine does not have a tack stitch like that, then what you can do is use your regular straight stitch and do it 2 or 3 times. Run it through once, then run it through again. But you can see here that now I have, it just gives a little bit extra strength to that stitch and will keep it from coming out as you're putting things in and out and in and out. So you're going to do that stitch all the way along your pocket for your entire mat. Now you're going to take your longer piece of binding. This is the binding that you measured to go all the way around your mat, and we're going to attach that. And remember that we want to start on the back. I'm going to show you how to turn these corners. So we're going back to our 1/4 inch foot, and this time we're going to start with our binding side that has the angled edge that's been pressed. Just put it in your lap. We're not going to start at the top. We're going to start a little ways down here. It doesn't matter whether you're at the top or the bottom. I would suggest that your pocket be towards the bottom, and you just start on one end or the other. Lay it across there and line it up. Do not start up here. You want to make sure you start a little ways down here, and you'll see why here in just a bit. We're going to start with a little bit of a back stitch, and we're going to, oops, I forgot to change it back to a straight stitch. No biggie. Just go all the way down here. When you're about 1/4 inch away from the end, we're going to stop. We're going to back stitch. I'm going to break the thread. And then we're going to fold the bias binding back so it's straight here and angled here. And then we're going to come back across this way. So you see, we're going to turn and we're going to start stitching from that end. You might have to push it a little bit, get it going. And we're going to do that all the way around. So now we're at the other end, about 1/4 inch away. We're going to back stitch, cut the thread. We're going to fold this back so that we have this angle here and straight across here, and then bring this back this way. Turn the mat. So now we're about to make the last turn, and I'm doing this on a sample piece because I'm actually going to finish that mat out for another one of my machines. So we do the same thing. We go across and we come back, and I'm going to show you how to finish it here. So go on ahead and get started out. And then you'll be able to see exactly how much of this you need to finish. Now remember how I told you not to start way up here, but we left this hanging? This is why. So now we're just going to take our scissors and we're going to cut our bias binding right above that little pocket. And we can lift this up and lay our binding in there. Make sure it's nice and smooth, and then finish it out. And back stitch it when you come to an end, and we're done. Now we're going to take it and we're going to press this out, and I'm going to show you how to do the corners when we top stitch it. All right, so we're going to press all the way around. I do the sides first. then if you just flip these pieces out, some people like to trim their corners off. I will if it seems to be a little bit bulky, but you don't have to. Give it a light press so that at least this is started. And the same thing over here and over here, and then we'll top stitch it. I'm changing out my foot and putting the 1/4 inch foot away. I don't like to start really high. I start somewhere over here on the side and decide where you want to sew it. Now we're going to be making corners. So one of the things that I like to do is if your machine has a needle down option, choose your needle down option. What that means is that whenever you stop pressing the foot pedal, it's always going to put the needle down. My machine also has a function where it lifts the foot up and leaves the needle down, which makes it real easy for making turns. So if you have that feature, go ahead and activate that because it'll make this a whole lot easier. When you start to get towards the corner here, just make sure it's nice and neat. I'm folding this back now. I've got my corner is ready. Needle down, the foot comes up. It's not quite far enough, so we're going to go another stitch. I think 2 will do it. Turn it, and then we continue on. And you see how nice and neat that made that? I'm going to do the same thing over here. Just before we get to the end, we're going to get this ready. We're going to stitch, make the turn. And here is our finished sewing mat. Plenty of pockets to store all of our notions, seam ripper, scissors, pencil, seam gauge, whatever it is that you find yourself reaching for the most when you're sewing, that's what you're going to want to store in there. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments or feel free to direct message me through my Facebook group page. Happy sewing!